Some battles determine who sits on a throne. Others decide which empire rules the land. But once in a generation, perhaps once in an age, a single battle determines the fate of an entire civilization. In 732 AD, a force that had already reshaped half the known world turned its eyes northward. Kingdoms had crumbled before it, cities had burned. No army on earth seemed capable of halting its advance. Yet at the edge of a continent, one army planted its feet and refused to move. Their commander held no royal title, wore no crown, and claimed no divine bloodline. He was known simply as the Hammer. What unfolded on that cold autumn plain would reverberate across centuries, bending the arc of history in ways few could have imagined. The early 8th century belonged to the Umayyad Caliphate. In less than 100 years, the faith born in the deserts of Arabia had swept across North Africa, consumed the Iberian Peninsula, and was now pressing into the belly of Europe. Kingdoms dissolved before it. Populations submitted or fled. To many observers, the outcome seemed written in the stars. The Crescent would inevitably replace the cross across the whole of the known world. By 711, Muslim armies had crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and dismantled the Visigothic kingdom of Spain with terrifying efficiency. They brought with them not just military force, but an entirely new civilization, new governance, new architecture, new faith. To the north lay the Frankish territories, fragmented, fractious, and perpetually at war with themselves. Europe as we understand it today did not yet exist. There was no unified France, no consolidated German state, no powerful English kingdom. Only scattered peoples fighting for ground. Into this disorder stepped Charles Martel. He was the illegitimate son of a Frankish nobleman, a man whose claim to power was legally questionable and politically contested from birth. Rivals circled, enemies plotted, yet through sheer force of will, battlefield brilliance, and ruthless political instinct, Charles began carving out his authority. His nickname, Martel meaning hammer, was not inherited from his father. It was forged on the battlefield, blow by blow, campaign by campaign. When intelligence reached him that a vast Umayyad army under General Abdul Rahman Al-Ghafiqi had crossed the Pyrenees and was burning a path through southern Gaul, Charles understood immediately that this was no ordinary plundering raid. Bordeaux had fallen. Aquitaine was ablaze. Monasteries were looted and their monks put to the sword. Nobles who resisted were cut down without mercy. A wave of dread rolled northward ahead of the advancing army, and many whispered that God had turned his face from the Christian West. Charles did not whisper. He mobilized, drawing warriors from across his territories, veterans of tribal conflicts, loyal nobles, peasant soldiers pressed into urgent service. He assembled an army that could not match the Umayyad host in size, but could, if deployed correctly, neutralize its greatest strengths. He marched his forces to a position near Tours, a city sacred to Frankish Christianity, and chose his ground with the eye of a man who had fought and won on difficult terrain before. For several days in the autumn of 732, two armies regarded each other across the open countryside south of Tours. The Umayyad force, estimated at anywhere from 30,000 to well over 100,000 men depending on the source, spread across the flatlands below. Their cavalry was the engine of their conquest, fast, disciplined, and devastating in open terrain. Banners rippled in the cold wind. Horses stamped with impatience. These were men who had crossed mountains and seas, and never once known defeat. On the high wooded ground above them, Charles Martel's infantry waited. They were not knights in polished armor. They were not the legions of Rome. But they had been drilled to operate as a single organism. Shields locked edge to edge, spear points angled outward in a continuous bristling line. Charles had studied his enemy. He knew that Umayyad cavalry required open ground to build momentum and deliver its crushing impact. By positioning his men on elevated forested terrain, he denied them exactly that. Abdul Rahman faced a dilemma. He could see the strength of the Frankish position. To send cavalry uphill against a locked shield wall was to surrender every advantage his horsemen possessed. Yet he could not wait indefinitely. His men were restless, supplies were finite, and rumors circulated that Charles intended to march on Tours to draw him into unfavorable ground. For 7 days the two forces held their positions, probing each other with skirmishes, watching, waiting. Finally, Abdul Rahman gave the order. His cavalry surged forward in a thunder of hooves and iron, dust rising in great columns behind them, war cries filling the cold morning air. On the hill, the Franks tightened their grip on their shields and braced their feet against the earth. Charles Martel rode along his line one last time. "Hold your ground," he commanded. "Do not break ranks. We fight today not for ourselves alone. We fight for everything that comes after us." The collision was catastrophic in its violence. Umayyad horsemen crashed into the Frankish shield wall with a force that sent shockwaves down the line. Iron rang against wood. Horses screamed as they impaled themselves on the forest of spears. Riders swung curved swords downward, hammering at helmets and shields. For a terrifying moment, the Frankish line buckled. Men staggered, shields splintered, gaps opened. But Charles had anticipated this. Behind every gap was another man ready to fill it. His infantry had been trained not as individual warriors seeking glory, but as components of a single unbreakable structure. The line bent, it did not break. Again and again, the Umayyad cavalry pulled back and charged anew, each assault aimed at finding the weak point that would cause the entire formation to collapse. Each time, the shield wall absorbed the blow. Bodies accumulated at its base, fallen horses tangled with their riders, trampled by the next wave. The elegant, devastating weapon that had carried Islam from the Arabian Peninsula to the Pyrenees was being ground down against a wall of Frankish stubbornness. The hours ground on. The afternoon sun began its descent. And then, fate intervened in an unexpected form. A rumor spread through the Umayyad ranks. Their camp, laden with the accumulated plunder of months of campaigning, was under attack. For soldiers who had marched thousands of miles on the promise of reward, the prospect of losing their accumulated wealth was intolerable. First one rider peeled away, then another, then entire units turned toward the rear. Abdul Rahman rode furiously among his men, commanding them back to the line. His presence steadied some. It could not stop the hemorrhage. Charles saw it. From his elevated position, he watched the enemy formation lose its cohesion, gaps appearing where there had been solid ranks. The hammer did not hesitate. He sent his men forward. The Frankish infantry, battered and bloodied after a full day of brutal defense, found reserves of energy that even they had not known they possessed. They surged down the slope into the wavering Umayyad formation, with axes and short swords, exploiting every gap, driving wedges into the dissolving lines. The battle shifted in minutes from grinding stalemate to chaotic rout. Somewhere in the swirling violence of that afternoon, Abdul Rahman Al-Ghafiqi fell. Whether cut down by spear, axe, or sword remains debated. That he died is not, and with his death, the last coherence of the Umayyad army dissolved. Their commander was gone. Their camp was threatened. Their charges had failed. By the time darkness fell over the valley, the great host that had swept through Spain and burned across southern France had vanished like smoke in a wind. When dawn arrived over the battlefield, the Umayyad army was simply gone. The Franks secured the ground and found Abdul Rahman's body among the dead. Charles Martel, exhausted, surrounded by his battered but unbroken army, held the field. He did not pursue recklessly. He had learned through years of warfare that discipline in victory was as critical as courage in defense. The consequences of that single afternoon unfolded across centuries. The Umayyad advance into Western Europe never recovered. Future raids would strike across the Pyrenees, but never again with the ambition or the scale of 732. Tours marked the farthest point the Islamic expansion would reach in the West. For Charles Martel personally, the victory transformed his political standing. His authority over the Franks became unassailable. His dynasty, the Carolingians, would reach its apex in his grandson, Charlemagne, who would be crowned Emperor of the Romans and forge the political and cultural foundations of medieval Europe. Without Tours, that entire lineage of history may never have taken shape. Medieval chroniclers describe the battle in almost mythological terms. The moment the hammer shattered the Crescent, the day Christendom drew the line and held it. Modern historians debate the scale of the Umayyad threat and the degree to which the battle was truly decisive. But for the men who stood on that hillside, for the civilization that built itself on the aftermath of that morning, the meaning was never in doubt. The Battle of Tours was more than a military engagement between two armies. It was the moment a continent discovered whether it would survive. And it did. Because one man chose the right ground, drilled ordinary men into extraordinary soldiers, and held his line until the storm broke around him. The hammer had struck, and the world that came after bore the shape of the blow.